Whatcom County Ferry. The second meeting of the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Council. The first thing I'd like to do is call the roll. Janice Cottrell. Here. Janice is here. James Dickinson. James is here. Richard Fry. He is here. Pam Gould. I am here. Diane Harper is here. Todd Legacy. Here. Thank you, Todd. Carol Lant present is here, and Thomas Philpott is here. And Fabian Mendoza is not present. Perfect. I'd also like to welcome tonight Roland Middleton, the Special Programs Manager of Public Works, and Gary Poole, our current amazing Senior Master of the Whatcom Chief, who has just done the Whatcom Chief has gone beyond the call of duty in the last 2 weeks. Honestly, I think they deserve a round of applause. Yes. It's been like working on an icebreaker. That's all I can say. The amount of ice they cleared off that boat was impressive. Okay, I'd like to do the flag salute and then have a moment of silence. If you could all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we're going to begin with the business meeting. I think everyone has a copy of the agenda, and we had some agendas in the room here. The first thing that we want to report on is we made some requests to the county executive and to Public Works, information requests and timeline requests to aid in planning with our upcoming meetings. And Roland was very responsive and supplied us with a tentative timeline, and that was very helpful as we were planning. There'll be more on this to come a little bit later in the meeting. We also asked that Director Liz Cosa would join us in the near future, and she will be here with our meeting on the 8th of February to help talk about the new codes that are going to be come out on the 1st of February. So the county executive and Public Works has developed a new proposed set of codes. They're going to make them available on the 1st of February. And we will take a look at them, and then we will host Liz Cosa here at the meeting so that the whole community and the committee can talk about the code changes they're proposing and what that would mean for ferry fares going forward and ferry function going forward. We also requested potential dates that the engineering consultants, KPFF, might be available to come to a town hall here on the island and to speak to the committee and the island about plans and timelines for the boat and the docks. And we hope to have these tonight, and we do have some tentative dates, which we'll talk about later. We were hoping to have the town hall before dry dock, but I don't know for sure if that'll be able to happen, but we'll discuss that with Roland later on in the meeting. Now we have to there's 2 things we have to do tonight as a committee, and that is to review the expectations of boards and committees that the county executive and the county council developed, and to take a look at the Whatcom County Code chapter that created the Ferry Advisory Committee. So I sent attachments to everybody with the agenda, and you may have those. Yeah. And yes.
The review and changes to the printed agenda.
Yes.
The minutes.
Exactly, thank you. And that's on here actually with a star. The one One change that we wanted to add to the minutes to add to the agenda was to review the minutes, which we forgot to add in. And I did receive some suggested additions to the minutes, but not until an hour and a half before the meeting. So from Jim Dickinson, which these are all wonderful topics, Jim, that we really do need to address. And we absolutely will, but we may not get to them at this meeting. But we'll see if we have time at the end. Yeah, it was a busy day for all of us, believe me. So the minutes are available. I put a couple copies out on the table. The minutes were posted just a week or two after our last meeting on the 12th of December. So they were available to everyone to review. Are there any corrections to the minutes as posted on the website? And if not, the minutes will stand as posted. So thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen here. And we will take a look at no, sorry, that's not it. Here we go. So we have to take a quick look at the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Committee code that created the committee that we are part of. You've all had a chance to.
Pardon me, ours didn't change from the first thing. The first thing is still up, not what you're looking at.
Oh,
Sorry. Would you share?
just 1 minute for some technical assistance.
This one, right?
I believe so. Thank you, Bill. Okay, I think everyone can see it now. So this chapter was established in October of 2023 by the Whatcom County Council, creating the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Committee. And it made some changes. Everyone's had a chance to review it already, so I won't read it out verbatim. But the purpose of the committee is to provide review and recommendations to the county council and the executive on issues that affect ongoing operations and infrastructure of the ferry service to Lummi Island. It also provides a forum for Lummi Islanders to voice their ideas and concerns about the ferry. It has a number of functions to review and provide recommendations, to review the ferry expenditures and revenue each year to see how the balances are doing, to assist the county in collecting information from ferry riders about desired services and actual services, to analyze and develop recommendations, and to review and make recommendations on proposed changes to the ferry rates code, which we'll have a chance to do here in a week, and about multi-ride card services, and to take a look at the Lummi Island Ferry Service Action Plan and see how we're doing with that. The committee can, there's a couple of things that I just want to call out. One thing is the committee now has 9 members. And it went from 7 members to 9 members, 5 members who live on the island, 2 from unincorporated members of Whatcom County. That would be Janice Cottrell and Fabian Mendoza, who is not here. 2 members from any member anywhere in Whatcom County, and that's Todd Lagasse and Carol Land. We also have, and a priority is given to a Lummi Nation representative if they would desire to serve. And we also have 1 county council member as an ad hoc voting member. This year we ended up with, we were lucky, I mean, because they meet together and decide who's taking what thing. And we got Ben Ellenboss, who actually is our county representative for this area anyway. So it's a doubly helpful thing for us. He already represents us and he's already knows a lot about the ferry system and how it runs. So he will be up to speed right away on this process. So we're very lucky to have Ben. With the county council seemed to be quite interested in all the things that were going to happen for Whatcom County this year as we're developing plans for the electric ferry and the new docks. And so they also chose 2 alternate delegates from the county council to represent this committee. And they are John Scanlon, who will be here at our next meeting when Liz Cosa is here, and Todd Donovan, who used to be the representative from the county council. So we have 3 county council representatives serving this committee, which I think is unusual. So at the meetings, we're allowed to, we do have to adhere to the Open Public Meetings Act. Is there anyone here who has not completed their Open Public Meeting Act training? I think Jill was going to take a look, but she thought all of us had, so thank you very much. And that means that all of our sessions are held in public. The public is always invited to speak at the meetings. We will always announce our meetings well ahead of time. The agendas will be posted so that you know what's happening. You know, that's all part of this. One thing I wanted to call attention to, though, is the number of members required for a quorum to meet and make action is 5 voting members, which is different than the last meeting. We need 1 more member. So 5 of us have to be here in order to take a vote on anything, regardless if any positions are vacant. So Fabian's position, if he does not appear in the next 2 weeks, will probably be vacated, and then they will look for a replacement, but that will not change what the quorum number is. It will still remain 5. The committee already did elect a chairperson for its meetings. Looking through all, but the other thing I want to call your attention to is the committee may form and appoint ad hoc committees to work on specific issues, so long as at least 2 committee members are also on each ad hoc committee. And because of the work involved, taking a deep dive into any proposed code changes, we are going to propose forming an ad hoc committee to look at the codes. There will be at least 2 Ferry Advisory Committee members on the committee, and we will ask for any volunteers from the community that would be interested in also serving on that committee. And they will take a very deep look at exactly what the code says and then come back to us with a synopsis of the changes for our meeting on the 7th. And then Liz Cosa, the Director of Public Works, will be here to discuss that with us and her rationale behind the changes they're proposing. So I think that'll be really helpful, and we'll make sure the community knows that's happening. Let's see, the rest of this, I know you guys have all reviewed this before, so I don't think we have to necessarily go through everything. Does anyone have any questions about the Whatcom County Ferry Advisory Committee Codes chapter? If not, we will move on to the second attachment, which is the county council and county executive expectations for advisory board bodies. These are expectations that are put forth by the executive and the council to all of the advisory committees. And so just to be clear, the meetings are conducted in public, like we've already talked about. A quorum of the members cannot make any decisions. Less than a quorum cannot make decisions. They can meet, and they also are, a quorum of members will not deliberate about advisory body work. So 5 or more of us cannot chat together. 2 people, 3 people, maybe as many as 4, but never 5. because that is a meeting outside of the Public Meetings Act, and we're aware of that because we took the training. Members may not use their positions to secure any special services or exemptions for themselves or others. They cannot give or receive compensation or gifts. And one thing I wanted to mention here that's underlined says, members may not formally represent an advisory body unless given express direction to do so by a majority vote of the advisory body. And when I'm finished with this, I am going to ask that you authorize me I wanted to put a notice in the tome, but it was pointed out to me that I had not been authorized as a spokesperson for this committee. So I did put a notice in the tome, but with the caveat that I was doing it as a private citizen and not speaking for the committee. But in the future, I would like to be able to put notices about our meetings and what the intended topics are. And so, well, I'll have one of the committee members make that motion.
Isn't that the role of the chair anyways?
It is the role, but in these things, it says members may not formally represent the advisory body unless given express direction to do so by a majority vote of the advisory body.
The chair is specifically, that's, I mean, if you want a motion to direct that, the whole role of the chair
Yeah.
is to represent that body.
That is what I thought, honestly, but other people brought it up to me that that was not the case. So that is not 100% clear to me, but when I reached out to Jill, she suggested that we make this motion. So yes, Roland.
Coming from a historic perspective,
Yeah.
there's some history behind that, and so it might be best just to go ahead and have.
And have the vote. Okay, gotcha. All right, and the appointed members are expected to regularly attend meetings, and we are not allowed to designate proxies to serve in your place. And we really appreciate all of you coming, and I know the people that are coming from off island, that what a big responsibility and job it is to do that, and we really do appreciate it, honestly. Okay, so we've reviewed the two things that are required by county statute to review. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Would anyone in the committee like to make a motion that the chair may speak for the?
I would like to.
Oh,
Thank you. Someone speaker. This one isn't mine. I need to do that. Sorry. So I don't know now if the Zoom attendees can hear me, but my motion is actually a little bit more expansive, and that is that the officers, chair, vice chair, and secretary are authorized to act on behalf of the committee in publicizing what the committee is doing and in arranging for meetings and in other communications with the county about obtaining information and presentation. That's my motion. I move that the chair and vice chair and secretary be authorized to arrange meetings, to publicize meetings and what is going to be discussed, and to communicate with the county officials about requests for information and presentation.
That motion? Carol Lant seconds that motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries 100%. Thank you. That will make communication much easier. Now, Before we move on to open session, is there any other business that we need to manage?
Two things.
Okay, Diane. Yes, oh, two things, exactly. Yes, we do have two more things. So one of the things that we would like to do tonight is honor Jim Dickinson. Jim Dickinson. Jim Dickinson has been a member of the Ferry Advisory Committee for at least 2 terms that he is now completing, which is a 6-year cycle. He is, and I believe that he served some time prior to that as well. The Citizens Advisory Group. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, Jim has been an invaluable member to the Ferry Advisory Committee. He's brought a wealth of marine knowledge to the development of the plans for the new electric ferry, to his lifetime history of living on Lummi Island. And one of the things that Jim did is develop a history of the Lummi Island Ferry, which I think you've all seen, and you actually all got a copy of it at the very first meeting. It's called the History of Ferries Serving Lummi Island. And I can tell you, one of the things that I learned from this is that in 1924, the Lummi Island Ferry Company sold the rights to Whatcom County for the run from Gooseberry Point to Lummi Island, including both docks and the steam-powered 6-vehicle boat for that run. And Whatcom County has owned this Whatcom County Ferry Run for 100 years this year. So sometime this year, we should probably have some kind of celebration. But Jim, one of the things that we want to make sure we do is we want to capture this history in the documents on the Whatcom County Ferry Committee site so that it is preserved and archived and we can refer back to it. But in order to do that, we have to make a motion from our committee to archive this document on the Whatcom County site of documents and say that this is something that we want to keep. So do I have a motion for archiving the history of the ferry serving Lummi Island to be archived on the Whatcom County Ferry site? Okay. Tom Philpott moved to do that. Do we have a second? Rich Fry seconded that motion. So it has been moved and seconded that the history of the ferries will be archived in the document section of the Lummi Island Ferry Committee site. So thank you, Jim, for your service. I think you deserve a round of applause. Really. We really appreciate you and all the history you've brought to our committee. Vote. Oh, right. Oh, we have to vote. Oh, yeah, we had a move and second. Sorry. I was so excited it all worked. Okay. So all in favor of archiving the history of Lummi Island, ferries serving Lummi Island on the county website. Thank you. Say aye. Any opposed? No opposed. It passed uncontested. Now, the last thing we want to do is we have Senior Master Gary Poole here, and we would like to pass it over to Gary to see if he has any news to give us about our wonderful ferry. You just have to click on it. There we go.
Yeah, Billy's online.
For operations for the ferry, we have an upcoming dock shutdown on the 28th of next month, or the 20th. Well, next month there's a dock shutdown. I don't remember the date off the top of my head. It should be posted at the Islander and it'll be posted on the ferry. And that's just for our normal dock maintenance. And I would like you guys, when you go across the ferry to give the crew an applause for the work, those guys got beat up pretty hard this last cold spell. I've been there 31 years and that's the coldest I can remember that we've had to work in, and they did a great job. Yeah, so other than that, nothing new coming up. We are getting ready for dry dock, which will the end of April.
Do you know the dates of dry dock?
Tentatively right now, it's the last weekend in April till May 20th, Pam.
Okay.
That's tentative. So, but yeah, so we're started working on that, and that's all I have for operations.
So, do you want to gain the public speaking with and then where it's not? Did anyone spot? So,
I'd like to say something, Pam.
absolutely, well, you just have to come to the podium. We're opening the public comment section now of the meeting, and we have here, if you would like to speak from Zoom, you can use the hand icon and Bill will identify you and you'll be able to speak. And the microphone needs to go. Exactly.
Mike Skihan on Lemmy Island, and I don't think it's too early to start thinking about the electric ferry and how we feed that with electric power. There's been and the reason I bring that up is there have been a couple of PSC sponsored and Whatcom County sponsored studies on the availability and cost of getting power from the two substations that could feed Lemmy Island from the mainland. The issue is not the undersea cable. The issue is getting the grid up to par to feed an electric ferry. And so if you look at that along with the ongoings of the Lemmy Island 28 car ferry, which just got bid at $20.1 million, combined with a recent PSC report on power availability, I think this needs to be like a standing ad hoc committee to understand the mechanics of how this is going to work with an electric ferry, and to keep that, to kind of educate this group, to keep you advised as to what will be coming down the pipe to get an electric ferry. Thank you.
If not, Bill, can you open it to the Zoom members? Oh. So, oh, wait, Bill. Hold it by the. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, wait. Sorry. We got a hands up for one person, David first.
Yeah.
That's
Just 1 minute.
So you're gonna turn your volume on?
My volume is on.
Okay.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Okay, my name is David Kirschner, and I'm not making a motion, but I would second what Mike Skihan said. I think that's a good idea. And that's my only comment. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dave. I think we'll probably be forming more than one ad hoc committee in the next couple meetings coming up. So we'll definitely consider that. I think it's a great idea too. Okay, so now we've come to the section where Janice Holmes and Diane Harper are going to give us a little background about the Whatcom County Code chapter and ferry rates so that we will be better able to digest what is going to be coming at our meeting next month on the 8th.
I need to share. Why is it? Is it echoing now?
Hold on.
No. Okay,
Pam, do you still have the speaker?
so now I'm having a problem sharing my screen.
Give it.
It looks like the Zoom.
Oh, it's
is
pinned over.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I'm old. Yes, thank you. From the beginning. Okay, so Ferry Finances 101, Part 1. You are going to hear from Janice and I at least one more time on this tonight. We're going to talk about ferry finances because the code amendments that we're about to receive from Whatcom County actually do have in them exactly how we go about calculating what our ferry fares have to be. So you need to understand two parts. One is how the ferry is funded, and also then what the code has to do with that. We're going to talk about what is the ferry fund, who pays for operating the ferry, what are the funding sources for the ferry, have fares paid enough, what are the issues that warrant changing the existing code language, and what other code amendments should be considered. And I should back up a minute and say, I am Diane Harper, and I did serve on the 2011 Ferry Task Force, along with a guy who had a doctorate in statistics and a woman who was a very, very talented CPA. And I had to learn about ferry finances really quickly. And so I come with that background, and also that I worked for Whatcom County for 9 years. So I know something about the internal workings of council and so forth. And my co-perpetrator, Janice Holmes, is a former Lummi Island Work Group member who became familiar with the finances. She's an island resident and a small business owner and a retired attorney. So she really does understand the legal aspect of this. So we're going to try and give you Ferry 101. In Washington State, ferry systems are roads and bridges. And there are 4 counties that have ferry systems. Their state also operates a ferry system. And every one of those systems has a very large gap between what the fares pay and what it actually costs to operate. The table down below really isn't of very much significance, except to point out that ferries are very, very expensive compared to most roads and bridges. Our ferry system is a ferry and 2 bridges. It comprises about 0.3% of the roads and bridges the county has to take care of, but it does take about 7% of the road fund, which is the fund that does have to pay for all of these roads and bridges. Every county has a different way of computing operating costs, and every county has a different way of deciding how much fares to charge. And why are they different? It's because each county council has made a choice about how those things will be done. So what do we have? We have multiple, quote, funds in Whatcom County. The ferry fund was created in 2006 because they wanted one place where all of the income and all of the expenses of the ferry could be tracked. Up to that time, all of that was done within the road fund. And they said, no, wait a minute, we want to be able to track this separately. Whatcom County also has a road fund, which, as I said, takes care of all the roads and bridges, including the ferry. And those 2 funds, also, there's a 3rd fund that we have to pay a little bit of attention to, and that's the equipment rental and revolving fund. Believe it or not, the ferry fund is an enterprise fund, and in the state law, enterprise funds are there in order to make money. So they always have a money-making component. Well, our money-making component is the ferry itself, except the ferry fund in this case does not actually own the ferry. The equipment rental and revolving fund owns the ferry. So the ferry fund pays rent to this other fund. I'm belaboring this a bit because there's been a lot of confusion over the past few years on what the ferry fund is. Bottom line, it pays 100% of the total operating expenses. And then one of the ways that it pays for it is to collect fares. Now you're going to see a bunch of yellow and orange boxes on your screen. Those are all simply mathematical accounting operations that are done within the ferry fund. There's absolutely no money that moves, like it doesn't move from the ferry fund to the road fund or the road fund to the ferry fund. The fares collected go to the ferry fund pays the total operating expenses, but then these calculations are done. And the point of the calculations is to figure out how much our fares have to be. The bottom line is the county since 2006, I'm going to go back just a moment, has said that 55% of the adjusted operating expenses must come from fares. And in some years we've had more fares than that, and some years we've had less. And that has gone into what hasn't before been very well defined, but we're going to try and define it in these new code amendments, the cumulative fare box revenue, so that we actually track how much revenue is collected each year or how much of that revenue goes back out. One other point I want to make here, and I can't make it strongly enough, and that is the code language puts into law the policy of the county council. That our county's policy about ferry fares is written into that code language. So when you see amendments to code language, some of them are just clarifications. They're just trying to get it so it can't be misunderstood. Some of them are policy changes. And it's very important to note that this Whatcom County Code Chapter 10.34 has both clarifications and the possibility of policy changes. And what we'll be asked to do is to look at all of those possible changes and then to comment on whether or not we think they do clarify things, and also whether or not we think the policy change is a good idea. So what else pays for the ferry operations? And the answer is the road fund. Where does the road fund get its money? It gets its money from the unincorporated areas property tax. And that's why the county council said we've got to have some unincorporated area residents on this committee, because only unincorporated residents of Whatcom County pay for the ferry. The city residents do not, or city property owners do not. And Lummi Island property owners, we're unincorporated area, we also pay for this unincorporated area property tax. So an obvious question is, how much does it cost? Public Works did a calculation for us a few months ago that in 2022, the owner of a property in unincorporated area valued at $500,000 paid $37 that year to operate our ferry. That is not a capital cost. That's operations cost. By comparison, one passenger vehicle with driver for one round trip is $14. Ferry fares for 5 days a week with one of our punch cards that gives you a good discount. That individual who was commuting to a job or for medical reasons would pay $2,256 a year. The cost of having a partial load of concrete delivered to the island is $600. So on the other hand, all of the unincorporated area properties do pay. And if your unincorporated area property is worth $500,000, then you paid $37. What did you pay if you lived in the city? Nothing. Okay. So one last point on that. A few years ago, I actually looked it up in the Bellingham Herald. I believe it was 2014. There was some articles about this bridge that Whatcom County replaced out in the, I think it was the South Fork Valley area. And the bridge cost about $6 million and it served 12 households. And our bridge, the ferry, serves about 1,000 people of full-time residents, which goes up to about 2,500, 3,000 people in the summer. Here's the thing. Using that kind of math, you could say, well, a capital expense, because that bridge was paid by capital grants. Gee whiz, the comparison is the capital cost of the bridge to Lummi Island, the two bridges and ferry, might be $80–100 million in comparison to that $6 million. The issue is we're talking operating costs. Once that bridge was built, then the operating and maintenance costs were pretty low. They're just another bridge out in the county. Our operating costs are several $1 million every year. And so that $37 on the unincorporated area value of property valued at $500,000 is spent each year for operating costs and not one time for the capital costs. So again, when we look at all of these boring words, what we're actually doing is we're deciding how much ferry fares are going to cost. So that's why we're going to pay as much attention as we possibly can the next few meetings to getting those right, getting those words right. So Janice is going to step in and now go through some of the specific areas of wording that we need to be concerned about. And then we'll be open to comments and questions from both the committee and Zoom and those here in attendance.
Thank you, Diane. So my name's Janice Holmes and I live on the island. And I know very little about finances until I met Diane. And, and now I know a lot more than I ever thought I would. So I want to talk a little bit about how the Ferry System Fund works so that you get some sense of where the revenue and expenses and how they're accounted for. So on this chart, you can see this is a slice of all the revenue that comes into the Ferry System Fund. There's some county employee trip credits for whenever a Whatcom County employee rides the ferry. There's interest from investment of revenue. The two big things next to that, the yellow and the orange, the Washington State Motor Vehicle Fuel Tax, which is allocated, it's called a Ferry Deficit Reimbursement Fund. And this money coming from motor vehicle fuel tax comes solely because Whatcom County has a ferry. And so that money goes directly into the ferry system fund. It's distributed to all the counties that have a ferry, and it's solely for that purpose. Then there's additional fuel tax dollars that come that's attributable to the ferry because the ferry is a road. That money is distributed into the Public Works Road Fund and then passed through to the Ferry System Fund. And this was the one area that was an accounting discrepancy last year that had not been passed through to the Ferry System Fund. And in reviewing the history and the language of the code, Public Works, and then followed up by the county council resolution, memorialized that yes, in fact, those dollars also go to the ferry after passing through the road fund. And then the two larger wedges is the Public Works contribution and then the fare box revenue. Now this is total revenue that comes into the ferry system fund that pays 100% of total operating costs. And even with this as a total revenue, you can see that the fare box revenue is the larger amount of revenue that comes into the system. So, but fare box revenue by code is only to pay 55% of an adjusted total operating expense. And so what the council has decided and what's in the code is that the sources of revenue from the miscellaneous and the interest and the motor vehicle fuel tax, those are subtracted out from the total operating expense. And then from that remainder is the fare box revenue and Public Works. And this is again by code where you see this language that's boxed in next to the chart. This is actual language from the code. And it says that of the adjusted total operating expense, 55% is to be earned from fare box, from ferry fares. Now, the code does not say that the Public Works share is 45%. It just is responsible for the remainder. And so it's assumed in most times that it is 45%, but it doesn't have to be. It's not put in the code that way. The only thing that's defined as fare box revenue has to be 55%. And this allows for Public Works to perhaps develop other sources, whether it's grant funding or some other revenue streams, to make up that remaining 45%. And it's really important to remember that this is not, these two revenue streams from Public Works and from the fare box revenue are not 100% of the funding necessary, even though they seem to add up to that. They're not. And that's really important to remember as you go. And so if you look at this graph, you can see the top dark line, that is the total operating costs from 2006 to 2026. However, it's based on actual data up until 2022. And then it's based on projected data from 2023 to 2026. And so you can see that 100% of total operating costs is the top line and gradually has gone up over the years. The orange or reddish line, that's the 55% of the adjusted total operating costs, and it should track the top line. The blue line is the actual fare revenue. And you can see that back in 2008, at the economic downturn, the fare revenue dropped below the goal. It dropped below that red line, that orange line. And so in 2011, the council imposed a $3 surcharge across the board to all fares. And so that did a couple things. One, it started to bring in more revenue, but it also distorted the proportionality of the fares. And so car and driver fares then, because a $3 across the board fare increased by about 23%, while pedestrian walk-on fares increased by about 40%. So that's something to keep in mind as you move through considering the fare schedule. The shaded area underneath is the cumulative either deficit or surplus funds generated by fare revenue. And you can see in 2008, there were deficits. And then after the $3 surcharge, which was then in 2015 converted to simply the fare, that we came out of the deficit and began to accumulate a surplus. And that accumulated all the way up until 2020 when we had a pandemic. And yeah, and we had a pandemic, and you can see pointed out there by the arrow, that's when for a period of time, and I can't quite recall how long it was, but it was a few months where fares were not collected at all. And also ridership plummeted because of asking people to restrict travel to essential travel only. So fares really dropped there. And if you look at the revenue before and after that drop, we lost about $358,000 in revenue based on those two occurrences during the pandemic. And there are ARPA funds available to fill that gap that have not yet been allocated for this purpose, but there has been an indication of a willingness on the part of the county to do so. So the other major impact as to where we are, as why we're using up that surplus, is the downward facing arrow, that peak. And that's when the charges for the dolphins were included into operation and maintenance. And that was an $800,000 charge that caused a tremendous spike in the cost of operations. I think I'm on to the next one. Yes. And so based on the lack of income during COVID and the $800,000 inclusion of the dolphin work, we projected to use up that entire surplus that had been gained over the years and to move into deficit. The timing depends on whether or not ARPA funds are distributed to the ferry system fund and whether or not those dolphin charges remain as a charge to operation and maintenance. And so, but through all that too, you can also see that revenue is pretty static, and revenue, it has not fully recovered to meet the 55% fare box rate. And so if that continues to be the case, it is likely that fare increase is going to be needed at some point. So the issues that were controversial that led to the reformation of the advisory committee was what expenses should be included in the total operating expenses from which the adjusted total operating expenses derived, where the fares pay 55%, and what should happen when there's a cumulative deficit or surplus in revenue. So this is a chart, a graph from 2013 to, what's our final year on there? 2024, that shows 10 years of ferry system maintenance expenses. And they are increasing. It's an older ferry, they are increasing, but they're not increasing dramatically, and that's the blue line. The red dotted line, that's when that 800,000 dolphin improvement, replacement, and repair was charged out to operation and maintenance. So the county code says that operating costs should include all actual daily running expenses and all actual regular and routine maintenance. And so the question for the committee is, what is regular and routine? And for 18 years since the inception of the Ferry System Fund, regular and routine was covered and did not have any dramatic spikes. But again, we have aging boat, we have aging dock structures, we have a potential new boat that won't work with the current dock structure. and we have hopes to manage the system we have until the new ferry is online. And so we're likely to see dramatic expenses. And so the question is, should that be considered regular and routine, or should it be not included as regular and routine? And so the question for the committee is going to be how to define regular and routine, or how to deal with these extraordinary expenses. And so the proposed code that was vetoed last summer had changed the language of regular and routine and substituted the language anything that's not capital. So anything and everything that was not capital is included in operations and maintenance. There are other approaches to this that I would recommend the committee consider recommending to the council. You can create a descriptive list of what's regular and routine. And there is a list contained in the agreement between the county and the state by which it receives the interagency funds. It's an interagency agreement, and it calls out a list of what is considered regular and routine, or what is considered in operations and maintenance. You could recommend that the council set a dollar limit, say $50,000 or $100,000 expenditure is by definition not regular and routine. You could set a percentage. If, say, 40% of an item like the dolphins, 40% of it is replaced, or 40% of the decking is replaced, again, or 50% or whatever, you could set a percentage that then again, by definition, is not operation and maintenance, but would be capital. You could recommend a limit on the cost escalation. You could look at a rolling average of 3 to 5 years and what is charged as operation and maintenance, and say, if it goes up by more than 5 or 10% in any one year, again, by definition, not regular and routine. Or if any individual project costs 50% more than any other project in the last 3 to 5 years, that's not, and that would be the dolphins. There were no charges. Diane, do you remember
Nothing over 30,000 until a $54,000 item that's the same price as all.
Yeah, so we went from average large repair and maintenance costs of 30,000 to 800,000 over 2 years. So, or you can try to create just a definition of regular and routine, with the goal being to exclude emergency or extraordinary improvement, replacement, or repairs. But that's what has really skewed. Well, costs are going to go up. Everybody knows costs has gone up. Fuel is more expensive. Our workers get paid more, as they should be. Health insurance has gone up. These things are going up, but when you put in an extraordinary charge like an $800,000 improvement, that should not come out, that should not be included in the total operation expense from which the fares are derived from. Now, that doesn't mean that doesn't have to get paid. It does have to get paid. But it would be paid the way the county pays for other improvements on roads and bridges through other funding or grants from federal or state. So the next issue was, what happens when there is either a cumulative surplus or deficit? And right now the code language says that whenever there is a surplus in the fare box recovery rate, that should be retained in the ferry system fund and applied only to future operating costs. The question here is, should this be clarified? Should it be clarified so that excess money paid by fares only be used in years when fare box runs a deficit, as opposed to an undefined future operation cost? Seems only right. So, if there were more fares collected than necessary, it should go to defray the deficit in fares. But then how do you look at it? Only for the last year, only for several years past? Do you include future projections. Right now, the code says fares are only increased when there's an actual deficit. They're not increased based on projections. But does that make sense? Because that can, as you can see from the COVID, when we had such a dramatic loss in revenue, that can then result in a quick fare increase that may or may not be necessary. And so the goal in setting the fares is for stability, so that those who use the ferry know that what the fares are going to be. There's not, changes every year. There's not higher fares, there's not lower fares. It's to keep stability. And so then you have to look at, so when we have accumulated a surplus, should you set a balance, a minimum balance? Should you consider a fare increase when the balance of the surplus drops below, say, $400,000, because that's what we lost in the COVID. And so if it drops, then you need to consider it. You should also, as part of that, consider a top limit, because if we're continuing to accumulate a surplus over $1 million, which did occur, it's not intended for the fare box rate to exceed the cost of the 55%. And so should it be capped? When the surplus is at $1 million, should it be capped? So those are considerations for how to deal with deficits and surpluses. And whether or not they should be able to be based on projections. It makes sense if you want to keep stability that you consider a multi-year situation, like 3 to 5 years of deficits, you consider a fare increase, or 3 to 5 years of surpluses, you consider a reduction. But one thing when a multi-year fare increase is proposed that's really important, say, for example, a 35% fare increase over 3 years, 15% the first year, 10% the second year, and 10% the third year. That's not a 35% increase from today's fares. It ultimately results in a 40% increase because of the compounding nature. And so when you discuss fares, particularly when they're raised gradually to keep a large change in fares, think about what the ultimate impact is in the long term, that it's more than what it looks like. And I think that needs to really be explained to the community when that's done. Some other amendments that should be considered when looking at the code. Sometimes the code has been amended piecemeal to address certain issues, and that's resulted in internal inconsistencies in language. There are places in the code where it talks about fare box recovery rate or fare box recovery goal, likely referring to the same thing. The employee trip credits aren't, they're internally inconsistent as well. And the council has indicated that it needs to be amended to allow for ARPA funds to be distributed into the ferry system fund. And there are some other housekeeping, just language changes that need to, as long as you're looking at the code, it makes sense to look at it as a whole, fix these internal inconsistencies instead of doing it piecemeal. Questions? Do you have a question, Diane?
ARPA is
Yes, ARPA, the question is ARPA is an acronym, which is correct. American Rescue Plan Act. Yes. So the question is how much did the county receive in ARPA funds? And I don't recall, but it was in the millions. Yes. Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, when you talked about previous expenses that had been charged to the fund of 30,000 and found one for 54. Do you know if there were any other large expenses that were paid during that time out of a different fund or just weren't?
Okay, so okay, but I'm just Todd's question is about the 30,000 operation and expense charge and the 54,000, and if there were other charges of that nature.
Larger during
Larger,
that time
Okay,
that were paid out of a separate fund.
Yes. We had that question into Public Works last fall, and we've repeated it now. And that is to please let us know the other large expenses, which were typically capital expenses. We do have an accounting of every single expense that was charged to operations. And of those 1,033 entries, only about 20 of them were above 20,000. However, if it was a capital expense, then the county paid it not out of the ferry fund, and we do not have those records. And we've asked Public Works for them. What they gave us was they gave us the information for 2022, which included 250,000 down payment on the Dolphins. And so we've said, hey, in 2022, there was a huge expense here, but please take us back 10 years and tell us what other huge expenses have had to come out of the road fund. So hopefully when Randy gets here on March 14th, he's not only going to give us the 2023 numbers, but he'll perhaps have some answers on capital expenses.
Could just do a public disclosure request through the county as a private individual. They would have to comply with that before March 15th.
Yeah,
Yes and no.
actually, yeah, actually, we did that.
Yeah.
We did that. Ralph Steele, who is with us tonight, did a public information request of Public Works last September. We got the 2022 information and then it got sidelined. Then we got an email saying, have we fulfilled your public information request? And we responded, no, you haven't. Please give us this information. So we are sending an email again now saying, you still haven't told us. We're still waiting.
and can I just, one other point about the charges that I think also I didn't clarify. When Diane brought up that the boat is in the ER&R fund, so expenses related to the boat maintenance run through the ER&R fund. So we don't have detail on those expenses. All we get is final bills from the ER&R fund. And that's an area that definitely needs more exploration to find out, because the dry dock costs over the last 2 years were quite expensive. And so the ER&R fund is limited by state law to not make a profit on the equipment in it. And so it's important to know what charges on the boat maintenance came through that.
Last year and this year, the charge to the ferry fund for renting the ferry, it was over $900,000. And that's comprised of fuel, maintenance,
Insurance.
no, there's one more, and then the biggie is the dry dock. And Randy has given us, I had the information from 2006 through 2010 because of being on the 2011 Citizens Task Force. And then Randy, a year ago, gave us the information for the last 4 years. We don't have any of the information for the years in between. But where you have a $700,000 charge to dry dock, we have absolutely no further breakdown. So
That's important information. Rich?
Probably almost all of that is for that really is probably like about 10 years.
Yes.
So this particular area is exactly
Yes.
with regard to how what is what items.
Yeah, so Rich's comment is that the earlier graph with the red dotted line that showed the extraordinary charges, that those are so much greater than the historical charges.
And they could be made up of multiple, instead of a $250,000 bill, that might be that there were five $50,000 bills. Was that your point?
See between 27. Yeah. Those numbers start. Good idea of encouraging you. But relatively.
Could be that whenever there's a particular request for a particular expense that doesn't fit into the current definitions, they can make a request, we can make a referral to the county council about what we think is appropriate at that time for that expense. And that's one way to handle it that you didn't mention.
I'm going to mention that because we didn't walk the microphone over to Rich, and not everyone might have been able to hear that comment, but that we will come back to this on February 8th and February 22nd, and hopefully have a better microphone set up. I think our time is about up unless there's another question.
Oh. Well,
In the room, you get to come to the microphone.
yeah.
Yeah, Ralph Steele. I just like Diane's quick comments on my discussion a month ago with regard to the $3 million that Public Works Finance stood at the Grange and said was in the ferry fund of county money, $3 million. A month later, on May the 10th, stood in front of us and said, they reduced that by 2 million, there's only $1 million. And by the way, we're going to take that $1 million out of the ferry fund in 2024 and put it back into the road fund. And there'll be zero county excess in the ferry fund. And by the way, good management suggests you should have 6 months of operating costs in the ferry fund to cover any unexpected fares. And that's $800 to $1 million, which they suggested would come out of fares. Is that substantially correct? And the $3 million came from the 1.572 original contribution by the road fund in 2006. And then we have found no indication that it is to be scooped, withdrawn, or through a series of accounting entries, the $2 million going to the cumulative fare box disappear. And Randy made significant policy changes on May the 10th with regard to 45% of total operating costs, which has been done for 16 years, to 45% of adjusted total operating costs. And I think that relates to the new code. It says certain things in the code with regard to everyday operating expenses today, and we've been talking about the dolphins for 12 months.
I think there's one question.
Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Am I on? Are you asking for Bob Anderson to comment?
We are.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Diane and Janice for an extremely clear and cogent explanation of not only what has been the code and the policies embedded in it, but even more importantly, offering these options to consider for funding of costs that are more clearly defined, and how surpluses or deficits in the ferry fund are to be treated and applied. I mean, that was really, that was a 101 class, and I've never heard it explained in such a brief period of time so clearly. So thank you to both of you. And I particularly appreciate that you spotlighted the two big issues that have tipped our surplus into a really deep dive toward a deficit, which are the dolphin expenses and the period of time when we had no funds during COVID. And hopefully there'll be a reset here with regard to the dolphins expenses and the county approving ARPA allocation. And I just really hope that there can be a good constructive conversation. I think you've set the table tonight for that to happen, to have the high level of discussion of these big policy issues, an openness to see what the different options are, and then an opportunity for a fair and responsible decision on the code and on fair. So thank you very much. I'll end it right there.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, I think, do we have anything?
We're out of time.
Okay, that's what I was kind of thinking at this point. Okay, at this point, thank you so much, Janice and Diane. That was really much clearer than I've overheard it as well. It was very, very helpful. And I think it'll put the committee on good footing when we start having this discussion about codes at our next meeting. This might be the time we're going to have Roland talk about some upcoming scheduling options, but this might be a time now to try to form an ad hoc committee of people that would be willing to look at the codes and prepare a presentation to the committee at our February 8th meeting so that we can go forward with the discussion with Liz Cosa. So we have to have at least 2 committee members on the committee. So do we have any volunteers that would like to be on that ad hoc committee?
Just say that you and I are the alternate being on who to present.
Yeah, both Diane and I, we know that we're going to be forming probably 2 and maybe 3 ad hoc committees, and either Diane or I will be on each of the committees so that we are well aware of the work that's being done. So Diane, are you interested in being on the ad hoc committee?
I think I have.
For Ferry Fairs, I think you do. Is there any other committee member that?
What is the charge?
It's an ad hoc committee that is going to look at the new Ferry Fairs proposal that will come out on the 1st of February. Code, not fair, sorry. Ferry code proposal that will come out on the 1st of February and prepare a synopsis of what the changes are for the committee on the 8th of February. Rich?
Sure.
Great. That is great. And what we'd also love to have some community members, if there are any members in the community that are interested in being on this ad hoc committee, that would be also great. We'd really love that. Any volunteers? And Janice, thank you so much. Janice has volunteered to be on this committee, so there are now 3 people on the ad hoc committee. Anyone else in the community or in the Zoom community that would like to volunteer to be on the ad hoc codes?
Perhaps you could ask people to contact you in the next several days.
That's true.
So that they're not.
Right.
Think about it.
Yeah, so Janice just suggested that members in the Zoom community or the greater community could contact me as the chair in the next few days if you are interested in serving on the codes ad hoc committee to take a look at it when it comes out on the 1st of February. So feel free to do that. At this time, we have Rich Fry, Janice Holmes, and Diane Harper on the ad hoc committee for codes. So thank you. So now we want Roland, who has complied with so many of the things that we have asked for the county from Public Works in the last month, They've been super, super helpful. And one of the things that Diane asked for and Roland brought tonight is large-scale copies of the drawings of the new boat to be kept at the library so that people can take them and roll them out and see exactly what the new boat is going to look like.
And the docks.
And the docks, yeah. So Roland, do you want to tell us a little bit about all this? And then we'll also talk about scheduling some of the upcoming things.
Yeah.
Great, look.
Could you? Okay, I'll try to hold the microphone and so for all you on Zoom, you'll have to go to the library to actually see it, but we'll give a little brief. This is the artist rendering of the new vessel. It is very conceptual. This is not exactly what it looked like, but we used this at the farmers market a couple of years ago. For those of you that were there, I don't remember exactly when that was, but it was, I think it was pre-COVID. So you have to add 2 years to everything now. Including side profiles of the boat, as well as the deck of the boat, pilot house, which we're calling Gary's apartment. And can you make sure that this is seen? I don't know if Mary, are you on there? But you can see there is the emergency passenger only float. This is the Gooseberry side, and then there's one for the Long Island side, as well as a schematic, which was conceptual design, but shows you the new queuing, which would be double queuing on the Long Island side. And here is the passenger only float on Long Island. And the very last one, thanks to Jesse Allen, our surveyor, was able to plot out the most recent map of eelgrass. So that's on here too.
Map of what?
Eelgrass survey. So that's the dive survey that was done 2-3 years ago. Plus on the website for a new vessel, the entire eelgrass report. I got that on there now too. So there's that. Thank you. And Diane, are you going to be responsible in getting this to the library? So if there's other things that you want, such as that, let me know, and I'll do my best to make sure it gets there so that people can go to the library and get the information they need. And thank you all for having some patience on the very small images that are on the website. And as I said, it is nice to be able to get senior discounts at all the restaurants, but it's not so nice having to use 3 magnifying glasses and reading glasses to see anything anymore. So here you go, and hopefully this will help you. So timing, should I go right into the timeline?
Yes.
Okay, I passed out some talking points as suggested on, this is more or less to get public works staff kind of in line and KPFF in line as well. As has been mentioned before, Whatcom County Public Works will be sending the proposed code changes to the Ferry Advisory Committee. And if Janice, if I can get your email also, I'll make sure that you get a copy of that straight away too, or at least someone forwarded to her, but we'll make sure that out. On February 8th, we would like to have Director Kosa here as a meet and greet and can talk about some of the code questions that you might have. We're hopeful the new administrative clerk is on board by then, but I heard today that that actually is not going to happen as quickly as we had hoped.
Yep. No,
Oh,
I've heard the same thing. So.
oh, that's disappointing.
What kinds of duties do you will have?
The brand new position, only it's less than 70 hours a month as a requirement under the union contract. that person could only work less than 70 hours a month. So it's a very part-time position. We are looking at ways of maybe adding an FTE, and so have the position do not only this advisory committee, but other administrative duties, but that's still a ways away. They would be working on the virtual setup when we're in Bellingham, helping here if possible, doing a lot of the administrative tasks that I'm currently doing, and trying to make sure that we stay on top of things like getting copies of things and things like that. Essentially, what administrative duties that you ask, and if it's beyond their capabilities or beyond their scope, then we can let you know that. So I would rather not limit you in your ideas of what you would like to have. So we need to work that out. Brand new position, unfortunately, a very limited position.
Committee in particular?
The question is it to serve the Ferry Advisory Committee? Yes, specifically, yes.
And
That's their duties.
And we are paying for it as part of our operating costs. It's an administrative cost that's become part of the.
So the statement from Diane is it's coming out of operating. And I don't know that. One of the greatest things that I get to have right now is the fact that I'm not an accountant or a policymaker. So those questions are for someone that gets paid a little higher than me, and that's Liz Cosa on February 8th. Then on February 22nd, Gary and I will be here to talk about the usual what's going on. We want to take any recommendations from your committee or from the committee as far as any code changes, because we have to turn around on March 5th and submit that to the council to get it introduced. To get it on the March 19th council.
Gotcha. And so, so you're gonna submit it
Yeah, it's been,
to get the code changes. It'll be introduced at the first meeting in March to the county council, and then voted on in the second meeting in March? No, okay. Well, so we just wanted to be clear that on the second meeting in February, first we'll talk with Liz about the code changes. On the second meeting in February, the whole community will talk together, and the committee will talk together, and we'll come up with our recommendation towards the code changes, but we cannot vote on it at the same time. It has to be voted on at the next meeting in March.
why can't you vote on it?
Because we, the way the rules are stated, well, Diane can explain it better than I can probably. But the 15th of March is the first time that we could get a voted on final decision from the committee to you guys, so that it could go to the council on the 18th, on their meeting on the 18th.
Keep close to his computer.
Okay, keep close to you're unmuted. The deal was that in the past, sometimes committees would come to some conclusions and vote. And so part of the communications plan that we have not yet amended, that is still out there for the Ferry committee, is that when something is final, we give the community 2 more weeks before we vote on it.
Yeah.
And so we have to have a final recommendation and then allow the community to think about it and make comments.
Right.
And then we can vote on it. We can decide, we need to amend it again, or we can just vote it in. But every time it has to have a period of time for the community to review.
That was one of the problems with the last group. They made a decision, voted on it, it was final, and the community had no time for input at all. So that's the way we plan to avoid that. anyway, so the middle of March would be the first time we will be able to have a final recommendation to you.
I will do my best to explain that to county executive. But we're on directive to have that at the council by turned in for the March 19th, which is March 5th for us. So that's the problem. Yes.
Okay, well, we'll talk to him.
Yeah.
We'll plead our case. Yeah, we will.
Okay. So what I have here is March 5th is when we're supposed to be sending the give it to the council, because we're 2 weeks ahead of every council meeting. So 2 weeks in front of March 19th, we submit it to them. We plan on having it at the committee of the whole. So if you are going to, you could show up at the committee of the whole when we're going to do the discussion and present, because that'd be after your March meeting, correct?
Yeah.
So that's a possibility. But then it would be introduced that night. The ordinance we introduced that night for adoption on April 9th. And then on April 9th, the council would be holding a public hearing of their own on the proposed ordinance, and then they'd either adopt the final code or postpone or whatever action they plan on taking. So that's the notes that I have here that is getting us through the code. Then on April 11th, I was asking if we could have Whatcom County and KPFF have the kickoff meeting for the terminal construction action plan, which is the beginning of, that'll be discussing at that meeting, it would be KPFF giving you a presentation of just the background of all the things that we're dealing with regard to regulatory restraints, constraints, as well as construction issues and costs and that sort of thing. And then set the stage for an open house, which we would do for the community also, all of those things, plus start the brainstorming session of the impacts that the community would have during a vehicle transportation outage. And I got these 4 dates from KPFF that everyone is available on those 4 dates. It's June 1st, June 8th, June 15th, and July 13th. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you on, I don't need a decision tonight, but in scheduling those, we want to make sure that it's not conflicting with some music festival or something else that's it's happening with the community. Or if it is, we want to have the open house right before it or right after it, so everyone can enjoy themselves, and then after talking about this, not enjoy themselves.
I did look at June 8th, and there's nothing on the community calendar for June 8th, the Saturday. Yep.
So, and I don't know, and again, I haven't had kids in school in a long time, so I don't know what any of those schedules. That's why we want to talk about it now. We can do it later in the summer. We have a couple of years still. Well, and amongst all that, so the last thing I have to say, having said all of that with your presentation, you'll still have fairs to deal with this year. So there's a lot of work ahead of you, and I only a little piece of it, which seems really big, and it is actually really big. We want to get going on it because we only have a few years, and I've been saying that now for 3 years. But there you have it. So,
Please tell me what KPFF is.
KPFF is the consulting group that we hired to do the permitting and design work for the new terminals and the new boat.
Does it mean something other than KPFF?
No, I don't. It's probably 4 people's last names put together, but I don't know.
Thank you, Ro. Thank you, Roland.
Got a question for Ro.
Okay.
Do we have any timeline for when the request for proposal will go out for bidding for the ferry?
We met with the Maritime Administration, who is the one administering the grant for the $25 million from the RAISE grant that was awarded. We received some, is this being recorded? Good. I'll just go ahead and say it really loud. We received some horrific news from MIRAD, is what the Maritime Administration is, not of any staff's fault, but they have an internal policy that anything that touches water, we have to do an environmental assessment, full-on environmental assessment.
On environmental assessment.
And we only have a year to do it.
When is the date up for the money going away, the grant?
We have to have this, we have to have the signature done by the fall of 26. That means construction would start on the terminals summer of 26. And we still don't have a determination from the regulatory agencies whether or not we can start the window early, or we're going to be held to the August normal water work window. And I see Jim shaking his head like, how are you going to get that done? We're not exactly sure, but that is why we want to pull everyone together in the community. And we will have all the information of what we're talking about, how many work days. We are looking at every incentive that we can give the contractor, because we can't mandate them to work on Saturdays and Sundays, but we can pay them really well to work Saturdays and Sundays. So, but we have to have the feds okay that, because they're controlling every dime, not just their 25 million, but all of the money has to be done through their rules. So that's where we are, and that's why we want to have this open house and KPFF. And if you have other questions, feel free to email me, because I'll make sure that KPFF puts it in their presentation.
Not yet. Thank you, Roland. We're at 7:43, and so off-island members will probably need to leave in the next couple minutes.
Oh, this is simple. Is the thing you sent earlier, Jim? I've got that. Oh, that? No. Oh, that I don't have.
Driver without having to attach it to the ground. And it ties in I just use it as an example, our old friend, the Hayou, where it now becomes, instead of a ferry, it becomes a pile driver platform.
Okay, so Jim, we will have you share that with Roland.